Exploding head, shocking revelation. This man thought he rescued a helpless puppy. What he brought home will terrify you. Viral mystery solved. Fearful face. The rain had just begun to fall, a light, insistent drizzle tapping against the windshield of the Ford F-150 as Mark drove down the lonely stretch of Route 66, the kind of forgotten country road that slices through the dark heart of rural Pennsylvania. It was late, past midnight, the kind of late where the world feels surrendered to shadow, where every rustle in the tall cornfields seemed to whisper a warning. He was dead tired after a grueling double shift at the Harrisburg plant, and eager for the familiar solace of his home, but fate, the cruel, silent architect, had other, far stranger plans. Up ahead something moved. A small, dark shape trembled at the very edge of the cracked asphalt, half hidden in the wet, tangled grass. Mark, a man whose heart was built on simple decency, slowed the truck, squinting through the sweeping wipers and the curtain of rain. At first he thought it might be a scrap of black tarp or maybe a terrified kitten, but then the shape lifted its head in a movement too fragile to be debris, and two enormous, glassy eyes reflected, unsettlingly bright, in the beam of his headlights. His own heart constricted, a physical, painful clench of protective instinct. It was minuscule, impossibly fragile, and shivering violently in the sudden chill of the late autumn storm. "Oh no, you poor thing," Mark muttered, his voice rough with sudden empathy, pulling the heavy truck over abruptly, its tires spitting gravel onto the shoulders. He stepped out, the rain instantly soaking the shoulders of his plaid shirt, and crouched low near the trembling creature, the muddy scent of the roadside filling his nostrils. It was no bigger than his palm, with slick, jet-black fur plastered flat and glistening from the deluge. Its ears seemed disproportionately large for its tiny head, and its little body shook with such profound, uncontrollable spasms that it seemed the cold, dark night might simply swallow it whole. Mark's first primal thought was one of white-hot anger. Puppies. Someone, some cruel monster, had abandoned this utterly helpless infant, left it here on this desolate road to die a slow, cold death in the wet grass, and the rage rose bitter in his throat. "Who could do this?" he whispered, carefully, extending his hand, palm up, toward the pitiful form. The creature didn't bark, didn't offer a familiar puppy whimper. Instead, it let out the faintest, highest-pitched squeak, almost identical to a newborn kitten's cry, a sound so unnatural it made him hesitate for a fraction of a second. Its tiny, needle-sharp claws, however, clung desperately to Mark's calloused fingers as he lifted it from the ground, a desperate, silent plea for life. The weight, or the shocking lack of it, nearly shattered his composure, and he realized it couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, separated from its mother far too soon. Mark cradled it gently against the protective warmth of his chest, shielding it entirely from the relentless rains. The creature blinked up at him with those wide, liquid black eyes, an unsettling intelligence seeming to shine through the vulnerability, as though it recognized, definitively, that he was its only, absolute chance. In that instant, a profound, irreversible shift occurred in the deepest part of Mark's heart, a silent promise made between man and fragile life. He wasn't just picking up a stray animal, he was saving a soul, and the weight of that responsibility settled heavily upon him. Back inside the dry cab of his truck, Mark carefully wrapped the trembling little body in an old, soft flannel shirt he always kept behind the seat for emergencies. "It's okay, little one, you're safe now, I promise," he murmured, his breath stirring the fine, wet fur. The puppy curled instantly into the engulfing warmth, its tiny tongue peeking out as it drifted, immediately, into a deep, exhausted sleep, its grip on the flannel surprisingly tenacious. The drive home, the last 20 minutes along the dark highway, felt utterly surreal, as if he were carrying a ticking mystery beside him. Mark kept glancing at the bundled shape, his heart softening with every shallow, perfect breath it took, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten in this new, urgent focus. But as the minutes ticked by, he couldn't entirely shake a creeping, unsettling thought, a whisper of doubt that refused to be silenced. Something about this creature was off, distinctly different from every puppy he'd ever known. Its head was strangely, almost perfectly, rounded, unlike the tapering snout of a typical dog breed. Its eyes were not only larger and darker, but almost too expressive, unnervingly deep, giving the impression of an ancient, silent wisdom. And its movements, even in weakness, seemed unnervingly agile, far too fluid, as if it wasn't struggling to survive, but instead was adapting, silently watching, and instantly learning its new environment. Mark tried to brush the thoughts aside, attributing them to sheer exhaustion and the emotional shock of the rescue. After all, what else could it possibly be besides a puppy? Still, when he finally pulled into the driveway of his classic American ranch house in suburban Ohio, the rain now falling in a heavy, dramatic sheet, he felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Holding the precious, strange bundle close, he whispered again, a fervent vow meant as much for himself as for the creature. "Don't worry, Shadow, I'll take care of you." As he stepped into the comforting, warm glow of his home, he had no way of knowing that this single, selfless act of kindness, rescuing what he thought was a helpless puppy, was about to pull back the curtain on a terrifying biological mystery, a shocking truth that would leave even a seasoned, world-weary veterinarian pale, trembling, and paralyzed with fear. Mark placed the tiny, flannel-wrapped bundle onto a soft, thick towel in his living room, his hands moving with the delicate care of someone handling something made of fragile glass. The little creature stirred immediately, blinking against the sudden, shocking brightness and warmth of the indoor lamplight. Its enormous, glistening eyes reflected back his own worried, hopeful expression, magnifying the unsettling intensity of its gaze. "Poor little soul," he murmured gently, stroking its still damp fur with the corner of the towel. The creature let out that high, soft squeak again, a sound that resonated deep within the quiet house, a sound utterly alien to the robust yip of a normal puppy. It clutched the towel with a surprising, almost alarming strength for something so small, its tiny claws curling into the thick terry cloth, before finally, deliberately, relaxing in his hands. Mark's heart, already wide open, melted completely. He couldn't recall ever seeing anything quite so vulnerable, so completely dependent on his singular choice. He set a shallow dish of warm, whole milk on the polished hardwood floor, hoping the little one would instinctively take to it. The creature sniffed the air with an odd, quick motion of its head, wobbled forward with unnerving balance, and then lapped at the white liquid with surprising, ferocious eagerness. Mark smiled, a wave of profound relief washing over his tense shoulders. "That's it, buddy. You're going to be absolutely fine," he whispered, watching for several minutes, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a consuming fascination. There was something profoundly mesmerizing about the way the creature moved, light, almost silent, like a flicker of shadow escaping across the floor. Its minute, perfectly formed tail twitched with an internal, silent rhythm, and its oversized ears constantly rotated, twitching at every infinitesimal sound the house made as it settled. Even in its initial, fragile state, it seemed unnaturally alert, an organism constantly studying its surroundings, cataloging every texture, every sound, every variable. By the time the little one had finished, its tiny belly full and round, it waddled back across the towel directly to Mark, pressing its small, warm body urgently against his legs. He reached down and lifted it again surprised by its delicate, almost bird-like weight. Without a moment of hesitation, the creature curled perfectly into the crook of his neck, tucking its minute head beneath his chin, finding the safest, warmest spot it could. Mark's throat tightened with a fierce, unexpected wave of emotion. He had only known it for an hour, yet he already felt a monumental, protective bond, as if an invisible fate had specifically placed this fragile, dark life directly into his hands for safekeeping. That night, he fashioned a small, comfortable bed from a sturdy shoebox, lining it carefully with one of his old, worn college sweatshirts. The creature nestled into the makeshift sanctuary immediately, but when Mark attempted to quietly step away, it let out a surprisingly loud, distressed squeak, scrambling frantically toward the edge of the box. Mark chuckled softly, a warm, genuine sound of surrender, lifting it immediately back into his hands. All right, you little dictator. "You want company?" he conceded, a willing participant in the creature's silent demand. Against every bit of conventional wisdom about new pets, he let it sleep curled right on his pillow, a small, black weight of pure trust pressed against his cheek. He lay awake for hours, mesmerized, listening to its tiny, rhythmic breaths, feeling its unique warmth against his skin. By the time the weak morning sun finally crept over the rooftops of Ohio, he had already given it the only name that felt right: Shadow. It seemed fitting for something so small, so dark, and so completely mysterious, a silent, tiny companion who had simply materialized out of the deluge and the deep night. As the days rapidly morphed into a week, Shadow settled into the house with the easy, silent confidence of something that had always belonged, yet it was absolutely nothing like any puppy Mark had ever encountered or raised in his life. Shadow never produced a bark, never offered a playful whine. The creature communicated instead with those odd, unnerving chirping sounds, sometimes low and vibrating, sometimes sharp and attention-grabbing, always making Mark turn his head instantly. Its eyes seemed to grow even more expressive with each passing day, following him everywhere, always observing, always calculating. And unlike most clumsy, sprawling pups, Shadow never stumbled or awkwardly fell as it gained comfort. Its movements were precise, perfectly fluid, eerily cat-like and controlled. One evening, while Mark was engrossed in reading a novel on the couch, he felt the heavy, unmistakable sensation of being intensely watched. Looking down and to the side, he found Shadow perched silently on the narrow wooden armrest, staring at him with a gaze of such deep, unnerving intensity that his skin instantly prickled with goosebumps. The little creature tilted its impossibly large head, its ears flicking once, sharply, before it let out a low, vibrant sound that was precisely not a bark and not a meow, something that sent a faint, icy chill down Mark's spine. "You are one strange little anomaly, aren't you?" Mark laughed nervously, trying to dispel the mounting tension in the room. Despite the mounting, undeniable oddities, Mark's emotional attachment only grew stronger, a tether that felt impossible to cut. He took countless photos, sharing them with friends in a group chat, who responded with confusion and disbelief. "That's the weirdest looking puppy I've ever seen," one friend texted back instantly. Another joked with alarming prescience, "Are you absolutely sure that's a dog, man?" Mark, in complete emotional denial, fiercely brushed the warnings aside, assuring himself that people simply didn't understand the uniqueness of his rescued companion. Shadow was his responsibility now, a tiny piece of family he had saved from the unforgiving edge of a dark highway. At night, Shadow proved to be restlessly nocturnal. While Mark struggled to fall into a deep sleep, the creature would creep silently, almost invisibly, around the room. Its large eyes glowed faintly in the pitch darkness, twin, luminous orbs that caught the slightest glimmer of distant streetlight or moonlight. More than once, Mark awoke abruptly to find the creature perched like a gargoyle on the footboard of the bed, silently watching him sleep with an unnerving, unblinking intensity. Yet strangely, he felt no actual fear, only an intensified sense of protection. Each day, the strange, magnetic bond deepened. Mark carried Shadow everywhere, carefully hand-fed it, and spoke to it constantly, softly, as though the creature could fully comprehend his every word. And in an utterly baffling way, it seemed to. Its small head would tilt with perfect focus at the sound of his voice. Its tail would flick once with an unmistakable sign of recognition and bonding. But beneath the profound warmth of their growing relationship, a dark shadow of fundamental unease lingered, constantly threatening to break the surface of Mark's denial. The more time he spent with Shadow, the more absolutely certain Mark became of a profound, impossible truth. This was not just a puppy. It was something else entirely, something he could not possibly name, and very soon, a revelation was coming that would force him to confront the terrifying reality. At first, Mark had been a master of self-convincing, arguing internally that Shadow's many quirks were simply part of being a unique, young pup with a peculiar backstory. But as the days rolled into a full month, the little creature's biological oddities became aggressively, definitively impossible to rationalize or ignore, creating a mounting, unbearable cognitive dissonance. For one, Shadow never barked. Not a single solitary time. No excited, playful yips. No hungry whines for the food bowl. No enthusiastic, bounding greeting at the door when Mark came home. Instead, there were those deeply unsettling, high-frequency chirping sounds that echoed with bizarre acoustic properties in the quiet house, sometimes soft and musical like a rare bird, sometimes sharp enough to make the fine hairs on Mark's arms literally stand on end. Each time, Shadow's wide, deep black eyes were fixed unblinkingly on him, almost as if the creature were performing an experiment, scientifically testing his tolerance and reaction to the foreign sounds. Then there was the way it moved, the chilling perfection of its locomotion. Unlike the predictable, chaotic clumsiness of a normal, growing puppy, Shadow was unnervingly, impossibly graceful. Its tiny body glided across the polished floor, its claws clicking softly against the wood in a sound more like a tiny, specialized tool than a pet. It could effortlessly leap onto the highest furniture, heights Mark would have sworn were physically impossible for its size, in a single, fluid, breathtaking motion. He watched one evening, stunned and speechless, as it scaled the back of his massive sectional couch, instantly balancing perfectly on the razor-thin edge like a miniature, hyper-efficient predator, surveying its territory with cold, calculating composure. Friends and neighbors who dropped by were quick to notice the biological discrepancies, their voices laced with cautious, nervous reservation. "That genuinely doesn't look like any puppy I've ever seen, Mark," a cautious neighbor named Susan said, watching Shadow creep with silent efficiency along the windowsill. "Are you certain you know what that thing is?" Mark, though he laughed it off with a hollow smile, knew the anxiety was a sharp, unrelenting needle pricking at the back of his mind. He didn't want to admit it, but the chilling, inescapable truth was aggressively gnawing at his rational facade. At night, the fundamental strangeness became undeniable, a terrifying certainty. Shadow seemed most intensely alive when the house went completely dark, a silent, hyperactive scout operating under the cover of night. Its eyes truly glowed in the darkness, twin, spectral orbs that caught and amplified the slightest, most distant glimmer of light. Food became another perplexing, frightening puzzle. Shadow fiercely and completely refused to touch dog kibble, no matter how Mark painstakingly disguised the pieces. Milk and soft scraps of cooked chicken worked for a while, but then the creature began exhibiting dark, unusual carnivorous preferences, sniffing with intense hungry curiosity at raw red meat, and even hissing faintly, a sound like pressurized steam, when Mark tried to pull a plate of steak away. Puppies didn't hiss. Despite the towering pile of biological red flags, Mark could not, would not, bring himself to turn away from the innocent attachment he felt. The emotional bond they had forged, in that cold rain on Route 66, was profound and terrifyingly real. Shadow still curled innocently against his chest on the worn sectional, still chirped softly when he came home from a hard day's work, a sound that felt undeniably like a greeting. But deep inside, Mark's worry swelled into a dark, suffocating wave of panic. What if he wasn't caring for it properly, fundamentally misunderstanding its deepest needs? What if, far more frighteningly, it wasn't even biologically safe for him to keep this unknown creature in his home? The inevitable final tipping point arrived one tense, silent evening when Mark carried Shadow outside for a few minutes to feel the cool grass beneath its paws. A neighbor's large golden retriever, usually friendly and boisterous, began to bark loudly, aggressively, from across the white picket fence. Shadow instantly stiffened, its tiny body trembling uncontrollably, not with fear, but with something Mark recognized as pure, dark, elemental aggression. It let out a low, deeply guttural, resonant sound that Mark had never, ever heard before. A sound that absolutely did not belong to any puppy on the planet. A sound of ancient, reptilian warning. The barking golden retriever instantly went silent, its tail tucking completely between its legs, the large, powerful dog backing away quickly without another sound, its instinctual fear undeniable. Mark's stomach violently dropped. He stood absolutely frozen solid, clutching Shadow tightly in his arms, the terrifying reality of the moment finally breaking through his denial. For the very first time since that fateful night on the highway, he wasn't just unsure what he was holding. He was absolutely, physically afraid of it. And that night, utterly unable to function under the weight of the chilling certainty any longer, Mark made the only decision left to him, a choice that could mean the end of their bond, or worse. Tomorrow, at first light, he would take Shadow to the one man who would know the shocking truth, the local veterinarian, Dr. Alan Peterson. The next morning dawned gray, cold, and heavily overcast, as if the very sky above the suburbs of Ohio carried the full, agonizing weight of Mark's deep unease and dread. He placed Shadow gently into a small, plastic carrier lined with the familiar flannel blanket, his hands shaking slightly. The little creature chirped softly, its wide, black eyes blinking up at him with unnerving clarity, as if sensing the profound shift in the air, the fundamental nature of the life-altering visit. Mark swallowed hard, the fear a dry, metallic taste in his mouth. "It's okay, buddy," he managed to whisper, the lie feeling heavy on his tongue. "We're just going to make absolutely certain you're healthy." The air in the sterile waiting room of the Midwest Animal Hospital was thick with the distinct, clinical smells of disinfectant, old dog fur, and deep, unshakable anxiety, a tense mix that did nothing to calm Mark's spiraling nerves. Shadow, resting silently in the carrier on his lap, was utterly still. Its eyes, however, were wide open and constantly tracking the nervous movements of the other pets, the small creature radiating a silent, unnerving intensity. When Dr. Peterson, a tall, kind-eyed man whose hands had treated everything from prize-winning show dogs to exotic reptiles, finally called Mark's name, the relief was immediate, quickly followed by a terrifying spike of finality. Mark carried the carrier into the brightly lit exam room, setting it on the stainless steel table with the care of a man handling a priceless artifact. "So, Mark," Dr. Peterson began with a professional, calming smile, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. "Tell me about this little guy. You say you found him on the roadside?" "Yes, doctor," Mark replied, his voice coming out unnaturally tight. "In the rain, near Route 66. I thought he was just a puppy, but, well, he's different." He carefully opened the carrier, and Shadow emerged with that signature, silent, graceful fluidity, instantly perching on the edge of the examination table, its dark fur contrasting sharply with the cold steel. Dr. Peterson's smile faltered almost immediately. He leaned in closer, his brow furrowed with intense, clinical concentration, the movement suddenly devoid of its casual friendliness, his usual easy chatter completely extinguished. The vet reached out a hand, intending to gently touch the creature, but pulled it back instinctively, a moment of profound professional hesitation. He didn't speak for a long, heavy moment, simply observing Shadow with the quiet, penetrating gaze of a scientist confronted by an absolute biological impossibility. The creature met his gaze, those huge, black eyes unblinking, unreadable, utterly unafraid. "Mark," the doctor finally said, his voice low, measured, and strangely shaky, "I need to do a full examination. Please secure him as best you can." As Dr. Peterson performed the basic checks, his movements grew increasingly precise, almost surgical, the professional confidence bleeding away to be replaced by a growing, visible wave of shock. He felt the creature's jaw, tracing the tiny, perfect teeth that were entirely too numerous and unnaturally sharp for any known canine infant. He carefully examined the bizarre, rotating structure of its oversized ears, which seemed capable of picking up a shocking range of ultrasonic frequencies. When he placed the cold metal of the stethoscope against the creature's small chest, he listened for a beat that was far too fast, a heart that sounded impossibly resilient. The vet took a few silent steps back, running a trembling hand through his thinning hair, his face having gone a sudden, alarming, bloodless white. He looked at Mark, his eyes wide and fixed, the professional facade now completely shattered, revealing a man who was genuinely, profoundly terrified by the truth on his table. "Mark," the doctor whispered, the word barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You didn't find a puppy on that road." He swallowed hard, his hands shaking uncontrollably now, dropping the latex gloves onto the steel table with a soft, final thud. "What you brought home? This isn't a domestic animal. This isn't even a mammal we have a category for. It's a juvenile of a species that shouldn't exist in the United States, or possibly anywhere known to science." The doctor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate rasp, the awful, impossible truth tumbling out in a rush. "Those movements, the eyes, the sounds. Mark, look closely at the shape of its skull, the bone structure. We need to call the authorities. This is what the woods whisper about. This is a cryptid, Mark. You didn't save a puppy. You adopted a baby Jersey Devil." The devastating, shocking revelation hung in the cold air, leaving Mark utterly speechless, his entire reality crumbling around the tiny, black, impossible creature that looked up at him with those unsettling, innocent eyes, a creature that had utterly and unknowingly stolen his heart. What happens next? They found the mother. The Jersey Devil comes home. Remember too, if this story touched your heart, just imagine how many more we still have to share. Subscribe to Whisker Tales, hit the bell icon, and join us for every next video of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Because every life deserves to be remembered. Exploding head-shocking vet reveal. It's not a puppy. Man finds Jersey Devil cub on I-78. Terrifying wildlife trafficking mystery. Revolving light. The drive from Mark's quiet Ohio suburb toward the city felt agonizingly endless, a tense, silent pilgrimage carrying a creature whose identity was now a terrifying, unsolved question. Every subtle bump in the cracked asphalt of the interstate rattled his already frayed nerves, amplifying the thrumming dread in his chest. He kept stealing anxious glances at the cheap plastic carrier beside him, where Shadow watched the passing scenery silently, a creature unnervingly calm, far too composed for what should have been an energetic, wriggling puppy cub. By the time Mark pulled his truck into the crowded parking lot of the Midwest Animal Hospital and Wildlife Referral Center, a sprawling brick building near Columbus, his palms were slick with a cold, desperate sweat. Inside, the waiting room buzzed with the familiar loud chaos of domesticated American life. The sharp, sudden yips of a terrier, the low, annoyed morrow of a Siamese, the heavy, clinical scent of disinfectant and anxiety hanging thick in the air. Mark found the most isolated corner he could, clutching the carrier tightly to his chest like a man protecting a dangerous secret, sinking into the corner chair. A little girl, no older than 5, leaning precariously over her mother's knee from across the room, pointed an excited finger and exclaimed loudly, "Mommy, look at that puppy! It's so tiny and black!" Her mother managed a polite, strained smile for Mark, but the instant her gaze fixed on the creature's enormous, glossy eyes and eerie, profound stillness, her expression tightened into a sharp, undeniable frown. Mark offered a strained, silent nod, shifting uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the woman's unspoken apprehensions. When his name was finally called by the nurse, the overwhelming crash of profound relief and terrifying dread hit him simultaneously, almost knocking the air from his lungs. He followed the nurse down a narrow, brightly lit hallway into a stark examination room, the finality of the moment settling in his bones. Dr. Harris, the senior veterinarian, entered moments later, a kind-faced, seasoned man with decades of experience treating the gamut of Ohio's fauna, from pets to farm animals. "So, Mark, what have we got here today?" he asked warmly, snapping on thin, professional latex gloves. Mark lifted Shadow out of the carrier, placing him gently on the cold, sterile, stainless steel examination table. The tiny creature blinked once under the harsh overhead light, its large ears twitching delicately, instantly adjusting to the brightness. Dr. Harris leaned forward, his expression initially one of neutral, professional curiosity. Looks young. Very young indeed. Where exactly did you find it?" "On the side of the road," Mark explained quickly, reciting the well-worn narrative. "It was raining hard. And, well, I honestly thought it was just a puppy someone heartlessly dumped. I couldn't just leave it there to die." The vet didn't respond immediately, his focus completely consumed by the creature. He adjusted his reading glasses, gently touching Shadow's small head, then lifting one of its minute paws, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. He meticulously checked its teeth, its ears, the unsettling sharpness of its claws. The longer the thorough exam went on, the more the doctor's face subtly shifted, moving from initial curiosity to professional concern, and then to something markedly colder, something profoundly unsettling. Mark's heart began to hammer relentlessly against his ribs. Is something wrong, doctor?" Dr. Harris didn't answer immediately, and he took a slow, deliberate step back, staring down at the jet-black creature as if attempting to process a biological impossibility, an equation that simply wouldn't balance. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for his clipboard, a sign of genuine shock Mark couldn't miss. Shadow let out a clear, high-pitched chirp, the strange sound echoing unnaturally through the sterile, silent exam room. The vet froze completely, his pen slipping from his suddenly slick hand and clattering softly onto the steel. Slowly he lifted his gaze to Mark, his face now truly pale, the color completely drained from his cheeks. "You said you thought this was a puppy, Mark?" Mark nodded quickly, deep confusion tightening his chest like a vice. "Yes, doctor, isn't it?" Dr. Harris's throat worked visibly as he swallowed hard, trying to regain his professional composure. His voice was barely a strained whisper now, sharp with absolute disbelief. "No, Mark, this is absolutely not a puppy." The room went instantly, terrifyingly dead silent. Mark blinked, the words refusing to sink in, his mind struggling to reject the fundamental truth he was being presented. He glanced desperately at Shadow, who sat entirely calmly on the table, staring back with those enormous, unblinking black voids, and for the very first time, an icy, visceral chill crawled up his spine. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cracking and barely recognizable as his own. The vet didn't elaborate immediately. He bent closer again, almost reluctant to touch the creature a second time, his movements cautious, almost fearful, as though he were handling something live and immensely dangerous. Finally he straightened up slowly, his expression utterly grave, all trace of the kind, welcoming doctor gone. Mark, I need to know precisely where you found this creature. Every single detail, right now. Mark's mouth went suddenly dry, his mind frantically replaying the simple image of the rain, the desolate roadside of Route 66, the moment he had scooped up the trembling figure, but nothing in that memory prepared him for the burning, desperate intensity in Dr. Harris's eyes. Whatever Shadow was, it was not the helpless stray he had offered shelter to, and the final, crushing truth, Mark realized with a profound, terrifying sinking of his heart, was going to be far more dangerous and world-altering than he could have ever conceived. The suffocating silence in the exam room stretched painfully, broken only by the faint, clinical hum of the overhead fluorescent light. Mark shifted nervously, his eyes darting frantically between Dr. Harris's pale face and the small creature perched with alarming poise on the steel table, while Shadow tilted its head, those wide, black eyes glinting, seemingly understanding every single word left unspoken. Finally, the vet exhaled slowly, adjusting his glasses with noticeably unsteady hands.
"Listen carefully, Mark," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper.
"This is not a puppy, not even close to a domestic canine."
Mark blinked, the words now sinking in with the painful final weight of sinking stones in his aching chest.
"Then what is it, doctor?"
Dr. Harris visibly hesitated, as though saying the name aloud would somehow grant the truth more power and more terrifying weight. He leaned closer to the creature, deliberately pointing out its oversized, specialized ears, its unusually pronounced jawline, the unnatural length and sharpness of its tiny claws. Puppies don't develop features like this. Their eyes don't possess this reflective quality, this inner glow. Their movements are never this precise, this calculated. What you've brought here, Mark, is not a domesticated animal. It's a cub of a wild species. Mark's stomach violently dropped to his feet. Wild? You mean like a fox? Or a young bobcat? The vet shook his head grimly, his gaze never leaving Shadow. No, not a fox, not any ordinary, recognizable animal you'd see roaming nearby. This is the juvenile of a species you should never, ever have been near in the first place. He straightened up, his face a ghostly pale mask of professional terror. Mark, you've been keeping a predator in your home, one of the most protected and secretive animals known to this region. The words crashed over Mark like a sudden, violent downpour of frigid water. He looked down at Shadow, still nestled calmly on the table, its tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically, looking like the most harmless thing in the world. A predator? No, that cannot be right, doctor. It's just a baby. It was freezing. It desperately needed help. Dr. Harris's gaze became unyieldingly hard, and that is precisely what makes it profoundly dangerous. Right now, yes, it's small, dependent, even defenseless, but in a matter of a few months, this creature could become absolutely lethal. Its instincts are not programmed like a dog's. Its brain is not wired to bond with humans in any lasting, meaningful way. Keeping it this long was incredibly risky. Very, very risky. Mark's pulse thundered a frantic beat in his ears. His hands trembled violently as he instinctively reached toward Shadow, torn in a split second between a primal, mounting fear and the fierce, deeply ingrained protectiveness that had grown inside him since that rainy night. Could it actually be true? Had his simple act of kindness been a colossal, terrifying mistake, mistaking an apex predator for an abandoned puppy? The vet's next words made his skin crawl with cold dread. "I've only seen something similar once before, Mark. It was when state authorities confiscated an illegally trafficked exotic cub. People believe they're cute, manageable pets when they're small, but they grow rapidly, and they never, ever forget their true nature." He paused, swallowing hard, his voice thick with professional warning. "Where, exactly, did you find it?" Mark's voice shook, thin and reedy. "On the roadside, near the woods, alone." Dr. Harris exchanged a grim, meaningful look with his attending nurse. "If there's one cub, Mark, there may be more. And if its mother is out there, well, you understand the danger." He trailed off, the horrific warning hanging unspoken but profoundly felt in the air. Mark's heart pounded relentlessly, threatening to burst from his chest. He stared down at Shadow, innocent, fragile, clinging to the edge of the towel like any lost, dependent creature seeking warmth. Yet now, every single feature looked devastatingly different. The needle-like sharpness of its claws, the cold, calculating glint in its eyes, the strange, echoing chirping it all suddenly, terribly, made perfect, chilling sense. Shadow wasn't a puppy.
he never had been. And the shocking realization left Mark with a final, terrifying, consuming question. What on earth had he truly brought into his home? And what was he supposed to do with it now? The room felt significantly colder now, though the temperature hadn't changed, only the devastating weight of Dr. Harris's unvarnished truth. Mark sat utterly frozen, his gaze locked on Shadow, who nestled quietly on the towel, licking its paws with an eerie, unnerving calm. He wanted desperately, violently, to see just a misplaced puppy, but the truth had shattered the fragile illusion wide open, leaving him exposed to the stark reality of the natural world. Dr. Harris pulled up a rolling stool and leaned forward, his expression now less horrified and more grimly patient. "Mark, I need you to listen very carefully. What you've been nurturing is not a dog, it's a cub. And given the advanced features, I strongly suspect it's a very young gray wolf cub. Or, more worryingly, possibly something much rarer and more exotic, smuggled here via a major illegal wildlife trafficking route." Mark's mouth was desert dry. A wolf? The word felt foreign, impossible to attach to the fragile, trusting creature curled near his side. "No, doctor, that doesn't make any sense. Wolves don't just show up abandoned on interstates around here."
"You are absolutely correct," Dr. Harris admitted, his voice low and serious. "And that, Mark, is why this situation worries me to my core. If it's a genuine wolf pup, then its protective mother may have been nearby. Or, far worse, killed. Wolves are intensely protective, and they do not abandon their young without a catastrophic reason." He paused, his eyes narrowing with the dark speculations. "But there is a far more likely and, frankly, darker possibility." Mark leaned forward, the icy dread now an open, clawing wound in his chest. "What possibility, doctor?" Lickly. The vet sighed heavily, the sound of profound weariness. "Illegal wildlife trafficking. People smuggle high-value exotic animals across the U.S. borders, selling them on the black market for staggering prices as status pets. Cubs are easy to move because they're small. They fetch exceptionally high prices. However, many die in transit. Those that survive are often instantly abandoned when their buyers realize the terrifying reality. They can't control a developing apex predator." The words struck Mark with the force of a physical blow, generating a searing, profound anguish. He pictured Shadow ripped from its mother, left in a dark, cramped cage, transported like disposable cargo. "So, you're saying someone just dumped him?" Dr. Harris nodded slowly, the confirmation a heavy, damning sound. "It's a depressingly common pattern. Traffickers often abandon the animals the moment authorities get too close to the drop-off point. A dark, rainy roadside. It fits the pattern perfectly." Mark rubbed his face with trembling hands, clutching desperately to the vanishing image of Shadow as a simple, lost puppy. But piece by chilling piece, the entire puzzle formed a single, horrifying picture. The strange, chirping cries, the eyes that glowed in the darkness, the razor-sharp claws, it all chillingly aligned with something wild, something profoundly untamed. The vet's tone softened slightly, but his words carried the full, final weight of professional authority. "Mark, I don't for a second doubt your generous, heroic intentions. You saved this animal's life. But wild animals, even tiny cubs, do not shed their primal instincts. They cannot be reliably trained or domesticated like dogs. Keeping one is both incredibly dangerous for you and fundamentally unfair to the creature. It desperately belongs in a specialized wildlife sanctuary or rehabilitation facility staffed by experts." Mark looked down, and Shadow, as if understanding the conversation, climbed onto his arm, curling against him with that now familiar, surprising affection. The warmth of the cub's body pressed into his chest, and his heart twisted with painful, acute devotion. "But look at him, doctor," Mark whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "He needs me. How could something so small and trusting be a threat?" Dr. Harris's eyes softened with genuine, deep sympathy. "I understand the bond you've built, Mark. I truly do, but sometimes the single kindest, most loving thing we can do for a wild creature is to let go." The room fell into another heavy silence. Mark's mind whirled, a violent internal conflict raging. Every instinct screamed a fierce mandate to protect Shadow, regardless of the cost. Yet the vet's words echoed with cold, undeniable reason. If Shadow was truly a gray wolf cub, or worse, some exotic black market predator, keeping him wasn't just dangerous, it was illegal.
a crime against nature and the law. Still, questions burned. If he is from traffickers, Mark asked quietly, his voice a strained whisper, what happens now? Will they come looking for him? Is my home safe? The vet hesitated, then shook his head reassuringly. Most likely not. If they abandoned it, they've already cut their losses and vanished. But the state wildlife authorities must be alerted. They will need to investigate the scene. If there's one cub dumped, there could be an entire litter, or even a different type of animal abandoned. Mark's stomach tightened into a painful knot. The thought of other creatures suffering, lost, perhaps dying in cages or on roadsides, made his chest ache with a new, wider pain. He glanced at Shadow again. The cub tilted its head, chirping softly, as if sensing his profound turmoil, his emotional collapse. In that moment of brutal clarity, Mark realized this was no longer just about him, or about a rescued animal. Saving Shadow had inadvertently pulled him into a vast, dark narrative, one that reached far beyond his quiet life, and into the murky shadows of greed, cruelty, and global wildlife crime. Dr. Harris placed a gentle, steadying hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing bringing him here, Mark. You saved his life. But now, you need to make the next, hardest decision. Mark's heart sank, a weight of grief settling in his soul. The intense, precious bond he'd built felt utterly unbreakable. Yet the terrible truth loomed, immense and all-consuming, like a massive storm front. Shadow wasn't a puppy, and gay. He never had been. And the final, agonizing act of letting go might prove to be the most difficult decision of his entire life. Mark sat for a long, quiet hour in his truck outside the clinical brick building, the gentle rain of the afternoon pattering softly against the windshield. Shadow was curled innocently in the carrier on the passenger seat, his eyes half closed, his tiny chest rising and falling with each shallow, peaceful breath. To anyone else, the creature was just an unnerving, strange animal, a potential, documented danger. But to Mark, he was unequivocally, deeply, family. His mind churned relentlessly with Dr. Harris's stark, final words. A predator, illegal trafficking, inherently dangerous. None of the scientific, clinical language matched the creature he had fed, cradled, and carried against his chest at night, the animal who had looked up at him with such profound trust. Yet deep down, a cold, unyielding fear whispered its constant warning. If Shadow was truly wild, a gray wolf, or something even more exotic and fierce, what would happen when he attained his full strength? Already his movements were sharper, his chirps more haunting and complex. A domestic pup could be trained and molded by love, but a predator would inexorably follow the powerful, ancient instincts written into its very blood. Could love alone be enough to rewrite the laws of nature? Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, tearing him violently between two different, impossible worlds. On one side was his exposed, aching heart, screaming to protect Shadow, to defy the law, to challenge the wilderness, no matter the catastrophic personal cost. On the other side was a cold, immense sense of civic responsibility, the professional warning that the cub desperately needed specialized experts, not a kind-hearted man pretending he was raising a dog. He thought of his neighbors, the little girl who had pointed and called Shadow a puppy. What if those primordial instincts snapped one day? What if his profound kindness wasn't, in the end, enough to truly tame the wild? The agonizing dilemma weighed on him like a physical stone. Keeping Shadow meant risking the safety of others, and possibly his own life. Giving him up meant irrevocably breaking a bond that had rooted itself deep within Mark's very soul. Either choice felt like a devastating, personal loss. And Shadow stirred in the carrier, letting out a single, soft, questioning chirp, his eyes opening fully to meet Mark's tortured gaze. The look was innocent, trusting, almost pleading. Mark's chest ached with unbearable grief. How could something so small and helpless be scientifically defined as a threat? Oof. Mark exhaled a long, shaky breath, the sound of absolute surrender. "What am I supposed to do with you, little Shadow?" he whispered. The only answer was the deep, reverberating silence of his truck, and the terrifying, cold knowledge that whatever choice he finally made, his life, and the life of his town, would be irrevocably, forever changed. By the next day, the small, unique story had exploded far beyond the confines of Mark's quiet Ohio neighborhood. A nosy neighbor, who had snapped a grainy, unsettling photograph of Shadow through Mark's kitchen window, had posted it to a local Facebook community group with the viral caption,
Man rescues mysterious puppy, but is it really a dog? Scary predator? Within mere hours, the post went astronomically viral, jumping from the local group to national Reddit threads and Twitter feeds. The comments flooded in, a terrifying digital tsunami of opinion. Some people were instantly charmed. So cute! Look at those enormous soulful eyes! #SaveShadow. Others were instantly sharply alarmed. That is no puppy. That is a wild animal. Report him immediately. #DangerousWildlife. The fierce, polarizing debate raged across every major social media platform, with complete strangers dissecting every minute detail of Shadow's physiology. Soon, aggressive, yellow-vested local reporters and camera crews showed up right in Mark's driveway. Microphones were thrust into his face as they fired rapid-fire questions. Is it true you've been raising an illegal wild cub? Did you know it could be potentially fatal? What is your final decision? Mark, overwhelmed and fiercely protective, shielded Shadow in his arms, turning his back and refusing to answer. The cub merely blinked calmly at the glaring cameras, its unsettling stillness only deepening the public's frantic, global fascination. Within days, the small town was violently divided. At the local Ohio grocery store, elderly strangers would approach Mark to praise his moral courage. "You saved that poor, helpless thing," one woman said, squeezing his arm fiercely. "You are a true American hero of compassion." Yet, at the town park, others whispered loudly behind his back, "Completely irresponsible. That wild animal could attack a child. It's a risk to everyone." Children particularly were captivated by the saga. They begged their parents to drive past Mark's now famous house, hoping for a single glimpse of the mysterious creature in the window.
To them, Shadow wasn't a danger. He was a living, breathing fairy tale. Teachers even used the story in local classrooms, sparking complex debates about compassion, ethical responsibility, and the laws of the wild. But not everyone was enchanted by the viral narrative. Town council officials grew deeply concerned. Rumors violently circulated that state wildlife authorities and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had been formally alerted. Some officials feared Shadow could be harboring a rabies strain or another unknown zoonotic disease. Others issued dire warnings about the irreversible danger of imprinting wild, exotic animals on humans. The word confiscation began to spread like a fire in the dry grass, sending a cold, sharp jolt of panic through Mark's chest. The local evening news station, broadcasting from Cleveland, ran a dedicated, prime-time segment on the story. The anchor's voice was grave and dramatic.
"A man in our quiet community believes he rescued a puppy, but experts now confirm it may, in fact, be a dangerous, illegal wild cub. Should such animals be legally allowed in private homes? Or does compassion for the individual outweigh the collective safety risk?" Clips of Shadow played on a horrifying loop, his wide eyes, his strange, chirping cries, leaving viewers across the Midwest both captivated and deeply unsettled. Mark felt the walls of his private life closing in rapidly. The intense, precious bond he shared with Shadow was intensely personal, but now it had become an urgent, sensational public spectacle. Each new headline, each town hall debate chipped away violently at his certainty. He was no longer just a kind man who had saved a helpless creature. He was the volatile center of a major controversy that was dangerously dividing his entire American towns. One night, while attempting to give Shadow a final, quiet walk in his secluded backyard, Mark overheard his two next-door neighbors arguing fiercely over the high fence line. "That wild animal does not belong in a private house," one snapped angrily. "If it's wild, it's a danger to our pets and children." The other countered vehemently. "He saved its life from the absolute cruelty of the road. Are we supposed to punish him for showing basic human compassion?" Their strained voices carried on the cool night air, echoing Mark's own inner, desperate turmoil. The pressure from the external world mounted unbearably. People he had never met before left aggressive, anonymous notes on his doorstep, some desperately urging him to keep Shadow forever, others harshly demanding he surrender the cub to authorities immediately. A small vocal group of protesters even gathered outside his house with hastily scrawled signs, "Protect wildlife and safety first." The once quiet, peaceful street now felt like a giant, unstable public stage, and Mark stood alone at its center, every single move, every silent thought, fiercely scrutinized by the watching world. Through it all, Shadow remained beautifully, terrifyingly unchanged. He still curled instantly against Mark's chest every night. He still chirped softly when Mark returned home from the store. He still watched him with those haunting, knowing, black eyes. To Mark, the creature was just shadow, small, fragile, and absolutely dependent. But to the town, the nation, and the entire world watching online, he had become something far, far larger. A powerful symbol. Some people saw him as a small, furry miracle, irrefutable proof of human kindness and grace. Others saw him as a devastating, ticking threat, irrefutable proof of human recklessness and hubris. And in the profound chasm of that public divide, Mark realized something terrifyingly true. The final decision of what to do with Shadow might no longer be his own to make. The pressure, both internal and external, became completely unbearable. Each passing day, more official-looking letters arrived in Mark's crowded mailbox. Finally, a thick, formal letter arrived that made his chest seize up completely. It was an official document from the State Wildlife Authority, formally requesting, demanding, that he immediately bring the animal in for a full, mandatory evaluation and assessment. The stiff paper trembled violently in his shaking hands as he read the final, cold lines. This was no longer just a difficult personal choice. The law was officially stepping in. That final night, Mark sat on his living room floor, the familiar scent of old flannel and Shadow's unique, earthy musk filling the air. The cub curled securely in his lap. The cub purred, if that was what the soft, rhythmic chirping was, softly in his sleep. Mark's hand stroked the creature's soft, unique fur again and again, his throat aching with unshed tears. Every protective instinct screamed a final, desperate mandate to fight, to secure Shadow, to rally against anyone who dared try to tear them apart. Yet Dr. Harris's words haunted him, a relentless, professional echo. It belongs in the wild. Keeping it is fundamentally unfair, Mark, to you and to him. Mark closed his eyes, imagining Shadow months in the future, fully grown, powerfully strong, his primordial instincts finally, irreversibly sharpened. Would the majestic creature still curl against his chest like this? Or would those wild instincts inevitably turn, as nature brutally demanded? The thought sent a cold, violent shiver down his spine. The next morning, Mark made the only choice that was left. It was a decision made not from fear, but from the deepest, most difficult form of love. He packed a small, personal bag containing Shadow's favorite small toy, the worn flannel shirt he had first wrapped him in, and the small, comforting towel. With each item, his grieving heart felt exponentially heavier. Finally, he placed Shadow gently into the carrier one last time. The cub chirped immediately in loud, sharp protest, pawing desperately at the confining bars, not possibly understanding the profound, final nature of the moment. Mark whispered, his voice thick with tears. "It's okay, buddy. I am not abandoning you. I am giving you what you truly deserve, a chance to be absolutely free." At the secure, government-run Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, uniformed officials met him with solemn, professional expressions. Papers were signed, complex questions answered with short, strained words. Then came the devastating, hardest part of all, physically handing over the familiar, heavy carrier. Mark lingered, his hand pressed firmly against the plastic side, his eyes burning with an acute, final grief. Shadow stared back, wide-eyed and unblinking, his massive, black eyes seeming to sense the finality of the goodbye. Tears finally broke free, blurring Mark's vision as he whispered the final, desperate words of release. "Thank you, little Shadow, for letting me be part of your story." The staff carried Shadow, the small black carrier clutched firmly, away down the echoing, silent hall, and the faint, diminishing sound of his distinctive chirps nearly broke Mark in two. He stood utterly frozen in the sterile hallway, his chest hollowed out by the immense, sudden silence. Yet deep inside, a quiet, profound peace began, almost imperceptibly, to stir. He had done the right thing. For the first time since he'd spotted the dark shape on the roadside, Mark finally understood the most difficult truth of all. Sometimes love means holding on to someone, but sometimes the true, agonizing definition of love means choosing to let go. The days immediately following the heartbreaking goodbye were heavy, suffocating with silence. Mark's suburban house felt emptier than it had been before the creature arrived, the profound absence of tiny chirps and wide, watchful eyes echoing painfully in every corner.
corner. He caught himself instinctively glancing at the empty shoebox bed he had once made, listening for the soft tap of tiny claws on the hardwood floor. But the space remained utterly still. And yet, despite the deep, crushing ache in his chest, Mark held on to the unshakable certainty that he had made the final, correct choice. Shadow was no longer trapped, torn between two impossible worlds, domesticated yet brutally wild. He was now securely in the hands of seasoned experts, with a vital chance to grow as he was biologically meant to, not as a pet, not as a wealthy person's secret status symbol, but as a pure, majestic creature of nature, free to fulfill the wild life he was born for. Mark often revisited that rainy night on the forgotten roadside. He had wholeheartedly believed he was simply rescuing a helpless, common puppy. In truth, he had stumbled into a far larger, more profound, and more dangerous story, one about the delicate, perilous boundary between simple kindness and complex, ethical responsibility. He had learned that compassion, real compassion, is far more than just the impulse to save something. It's the profound, heartbreaking courage to make the agonizing choices that sometimes shatter your own heart. The small Ohio town eventually quieted down. The polarized debates faded to low, infrequent whispers. But the powerful, unique story of the kind man who thought he saved a puppy, but discovered he had embraced the wild, lived on. Schools used it as a core lesson about wildlife conservation and the ethical boundaries of human-animal interaction. Families retold it as a cautionary reminder not to judge the world by superficial appearances. And to Mark, it remains something infinitely deeper, a constant, poignant reminder that life can surprise us with terrifying, beautiful revelations in ways we never possibly expect. On quiet evenings, he still deliberately walked the very same stretch of dark road where he had first found his companion. Sometimes, he swore he could almost hear that faint, tiny squeak again, seeing wide, black eyes glinting in the dark, wet grass. A vital, missing part of him would always mourn and miss the beautiful, tiny creature that had curled so completely into his chest, trusting him absolutely. But another, wiser part of him took deep comfort in the absolute certainty that he had given Shadow what truly mattered most in the universe: a future, a true life, and ultimate freedom. In the end, Shadow's complex story wasn't just about an animal found on a roadside. It was about the profound, difficult choices we are forced to make when confronted with true, terrifying responsibility. It was about raw love, monumental sacrifice, and the ultimate, quiet courage to finally, selflessly, let go. And as Mark stood beneath the same storm-cooled, indifferent sky where it all began, he whispered softly to the silent darkness, the profound final lesson of his journey ringing true. Sometimes the scariest truths bring the most important, life-changing lessons of all. If this story touched your heart, just imagine how many more we still have to share. Subscribe to Whisker Tales, hit the bell icon, and join us for every new episode of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Because every life deserves to be remembered,